Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. You may be seated.
As you all make yourself comfortable for the sake of your curiosity and for the sake of those at home who do not have a bulletin insert in front of them, it is a pleasure to have in the pulpit today the Reverend Phillip Romine. Phil is a neighbor. I met him first through a local Buy Nothing group. How's that bookshelf working out for you?
Fabulous.
Great.
It's almost falling off the wall.
Did you get that mug in the lottery list for that?
I got one of them.
Oh, great.
Just one.
Good to see a front that go to a front.
Yeah.
I jest, of course, but isn't that the nature of community? Chance meetings when you make yourself available and open to those around you. And it was through that chance meeting that I found out that Phil is the Congregational Engagement Coordinator for one of our ministry partners, Interfaith Action of Greater St. Paul. It is a group that does amazing ministry throughout Greater St. Paul, really doing that work of feeding the hungry and sheltering the unhoused and helping children in our community be resourced so that they can live into who they are called to be in the world. So I'm so glad to share this space and this time with a colleague and now friend, the Reverend Phil Romine. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. So I don't know about any of you, but in the midst of this pandemic, video clips have kind of gotten me through a lot of days. Those little short 2 or 3 minutes where it's just you and your phone or your tablet or your computer, and they bring you a little bit of something. The most brilliant one that I have seen lately opens with a young child, very young child, and she's bringing her father to the office, his first day back at work. The whole thing is a flip on the trope of the first day at school and the nervousness and the jitters and everything else. The young child is cajoling her father, says, here's a cookie for your lunch. And the boss comes out and says, oh, well, hi, Frank. How about you come in and have a cup of coffee? We're going to go over some spreadsheets in a little bit. We've got some quarterly reports, too, and we're going to do those today. And then the little girl says, all your friends will be here. Luke, Rita, Mark, oh look, there's Steve from accounting. And so much for me of what makes this video powerful is the conversion that's at the core of it. The child is leaving the parents to work so that she can go concentrate on the important things. At one point she stares at the boss and she says, I'm sorry, I have to go. I'm going to be late for arts and crafts. So when Jesus brings a small child into the midst of the disciples' conversation about who is greatest among them, he's actually bringing an otherwise ignored member of society into the middle of their consideration, into the center. Because, as Jesus says, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sends me. It is as if Jesus is saying, your attempts end up being the very things that blind you to God's presence. Behold the face of God, Jesus says. Neglected, ignored, cast out. Much like Mark's disciples, I think that too often we structure our lives around competitive conversations. Conversations that are about individual legacy rather than collective good. We have been conditioned to value things like whose country has the biggest GDP, whose state boasts the lowest tax rate, whose individual portfolio is yielding the greatest returns. What has any of that in the midst of this pandemic. We have been over the safe limit of 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere since 1988. The U.S. is one of 2 countries in the entire world that doesn't have a dedicated national leave policy, paid leave policy for parents with new children. One of 2 countries. Our news, instead of the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500, they don't run statistics on poverty, nonstop. How many shelter beds are available? How many are needed? And it was not the terrors of losing Trayvon Martin, 17 years old. It was not the terror of losing 12-year-old Samir Rice that moved the world to acknowledge the violent reality of white supremacy. If our children continue to simply be the inheritors of accumulated wealth in a world that is on fire, that is underwater, that is unable to breathe, and that is deluded and diseased and dying of disinformation, I don't see how our children matter any more than they did to Jesus' contemporaries. To whom, indeed, Jeremiah might ask, have we committed our cause? So when Jesus takes that little child in his arms, he embodies James's gentleness, born of wisdom, which is pure, which is peaceful, which is willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without trace of partiality and hypocrisy. But not because Jesus is some model of subversive, sublime, eternal gentleness. It's not because Jesus tapped into some more stereotypically feminine posture. The wisdom that Jesus radiates here says, you are nearest to God when you are in relationships of mutuality with the neglected, the taken for granted, the outcast members of society, because they, like all of us, bear the imprint of God upon them. So what would our world look like if we began to follow where our children led? What would our world look like if we began to have systems that were shaped by people who have suffered the most from them? What would our world look like if we began to hear God's voice calling to us, not just from our neighbors, but from the land, and from the waters, from the animals? What would our world look like if our target market was the flourishing of all creation? Mark's gospel is all about God's kingdom, not just about to break into the world, but already breaking in. Jesus' miracles, his examples, even the failed attempts in this gospel to keep his messianic identity a secret. These are all shoots of new growth arising from the ashes of wildfires. Greta Thunberg, that lone Swedish teenager, striking for the climate every week outside her school, she was the one who ignited the largest global movement to combat and adapt to climate change. And legal cases brought by young people to their governments for passing the burden of climate change onto their generation, those have doubled between 2017 and 2020. And as recently as May of 2021, this year, in Germany, the youth have started to win those cases. Interfaith Action recently received initial funding to begin building a human services delivery system that, wouldn't you know, is actually human-centered rather than system-centered. It's based on input from American Indian families on the East Side who have been failed again and again, generation after generation, by the very system that they've been pushed into. And even before the White Earth Band of Ojibwe filed a lawsuit against the Minnesota DNR on behalf of Minoan or wild rice, as its existence is threatened by the Line 3 pipeline, the residents of Orange County, Florida, in November of 2020 overwhelmingly voted to grant their waterways, quote, the right to exist. flow, to be protected against pollution and maintain a healthy ecosystem. This right can allow citizens to bring suits against individuals, against corporations, against municipalities on behalf of those waterways. The kingdom of God is always already breaking in. Even your community has found ways to organize multiple other communities, 8 I believe it was, correct? To feed folks who are hungry in the midst of the pandemic. You saw what was happening at the state fair and you said, no, that's unfair. We're going to double down on safety. We're going to double down on joy. We're going to double down on centering the needs of our children. We're going to organize our own unfair. I was mentioning earlier to Joy that I don't think I've been happier on Facebook in the last 4 months than seeing the pictures from your unfair. That amazing shot of you hurling that ball toward that dunk tank seared into my memory. You have relentlessly come together in person, online, because of our common hunger to see God in each other's faces, to hear God in each other's voices, to feel God's presence in harsh winter winds and soft summer breezes out on the green, and to witness the laughter and the screams and the randomness of children. This is what communities of faith, communities of practice, communities of spirit do in our imperfect and beautiful ways. We interrupt the regularly scheduled broadcasting of greed and indifference. We bring ourselves before God, and then we have the audacity to go forth to discover God everywhere, especially in places marked abandoned, forgotten, lost, irredeemable, irreparable. And sometimes we have the courage to walk where God leads us. At the end of that video clip that I was telling you about earlier, the child picks up her exuberant father at the end of the day. And she makes this big fuss. He brings out these meeting notes. He says, look, I got to see meeting notes during work today. And she says, oh, these are amazing. Did you do all these yourself? And she says, because you were so brave, tonight we're going to have spaghetti for dinner and we're going to watch the news. But then the little child starts fighting. She says, and she pulls her father into the room. She pulls him toward a time of love and connection. The good news, my friends, the good news is that our children have always shown us the way to be in community. Through play, boundless imagination, reveling in nature, longing for security, and sharing all of who we are and all of what we have. We need only listen and follow. For the free gift of seeing the world always anew, and for the courage modeled by Christ to walk toward that vision, I say,